Mexicans, for example. Would this kind of racism be tolerated in your country? What this Guido Giannasso forgot to include, or who, are Russians in eastern Ukraine, who have been murdered for 8 years by their own government in Kiev. Do they not have a choice? If you think Russia is just out there to kill Ukrainians left and right, then look up what's going on in the city of Kherson, which is completely under the control of the Russian army. No shelling, no fighting, people are going about their daily business. A tiny minority is even protesting the Russian army there. Because real elites that love Gorbachev and Yeltsin are unpopular in Russia. Yeah, they are unpopular here because they literally destroyed our country. They tore people apart. They caused it. It's not about voting and democracy. This is about us being enslaved by your corporations and your elites. That's why we don't like them. Because they caused so much carnage in this country, so much during the 90s, that we are still trying to get out of that particular situation. We are still trying to rebuild from the 90s. And Russians, the majority of them, are more afraid of the 90s coming back than of a war. I'm confident in that. That's why we don't like Gorbachev or Yeltsin. Not because of democracy, but because of what they did. They caused civil wars. They caused people to be destitute and poor. They did that. That was the legacy of their leader, of them being in power. And that's why they're not liked here, but they're loved in the West. I wonder why. But let's continue. Nationalism, solidarity, and cultural identity shared between Russians is complex and usually summarized through metaphors. Sometimes Russians revert to simply leaving this fact unexplained, quoting the famous poet Fyodor Tuchov, who said, "You cannot understand Russia with your mind, you can only believe in it." Others refer to the idea and symbolism of a shared Russian soul, dusha. This explains the soul as a combination of one's heart, mind, and culture, and the uniting point making Russians as cohesive and proud people, narod, constantly engaged in an epic battle to defend its soul against foreign enemies. If you read Putin's speeches, you will find this theme again and again. Understanding the cultural roots of today's tragic events is important. We must realize that getting rid of Putin will not solve the problem. The only way to build peace and stability in Europe is working on a long-term strategy to contain Russia. This can only be done with a combination of stiff economic sanctions, rapid buildup of a strong European defense system, independence from Russian gas, and integration of Ukraine and Moldova in the European Union. No, honorary council, that is not the way of solving the problem. If you don't want the bear to come out of the cave, don't poke the bear. Read this article again and replace the word Russians with Jews, Africans, Chinese, or Mexicans, for example. Would this kind of racism be tolerated in your country? What this Guido Giannasso forgot to include, or who, are Russians in eastern Ukraine, who have been murdered for 8 years by their own government in Kiev. Do they not have a choice? If you think Russia is just out there to kill Ukrainians left and right, then look up what's going on in the city of Kherson, which is completely under the control of the Russian army. No shelling, no fighting, people are going about their daily business. A tiny minority is even protesting the Russian army there. Because the city, the leadership of that city, made a decision to protect the Russians and Ukrainians living there. And they didn't allow the nationalists to use their own citizens as human shields, like they did in Mariupol. Now, all of this could have been avoided if your Western elites did not support an illegal coup d'etat of a democratically elected president of Ukraine in 2014. Someone who half of the Ukrainian population voted for. And over the years, the government of Ukraine has banned their own media networks, murdered Ukrainian journalists, politicians, the elderly, men, women, and children for not supporting the illegal coup in 2014. They even denied Crimea the basic human right to fresh water, and your elites ignored it entirely. Because who cares, right? They're Russian. Finally, today, May 9th, is a day of victory when we celebrate our grandfathers and grandmothers who laid down their lives to protect us from extinction during the Great Patriotic War against the Nazi war machine. It is horrible that once again, a mere 77 years after the end of the bloodiest war, we have to answer the call to protect ourselves. Мы помним, мы знаем.
All right, Sleuth, hand over that paper. Wait a minute, big shot. Carrying a gun is serious business. Shooting a gun is much more.
Not just Ukrainian to protect our... Помним. Мы знаем. Помним. Мы помним. Мы знаем.
All right, Sleuth, hand over that paper. Wait a minute, big shot. Carrying a gun is serious business. Shooting a gun is much more serious. As you'll find out unless you give me that paper.
Before you take